Hey everybody, welcome back to Townscaper. I have no idea why the last video I made on this game has so many views, but huge thanks to the YouTube algorithm, I guess, and my apologies to everybody who heard the Discord notifications. It was kind of a quick video I just put out about a game that I wasn't really expecting too much from. I mean, I wasn't expecting much from the video. I was expecting quite a lot from the game because it's off to a really great start and I do like it a lot. But yeah, I accidentally pranked hundreds of thousands of people. Sorry, not sorry. I kind of like the fact that I pranked people accidentally, I suppose. Anyway, to move into what this video is actually about, and you're probably looking at this going, this isn't Venice, this isn't what you promised in the title and thumbnail of this video. There's just one more thing that I quickly want to show before we actually get into it. I want to keep releasing videos on this game every now and then because the creator is still updating it as well and adding lots of cool small features and bug fixes to it, so that's really nice to see. And something that got added on the 5th of August is a very small change that can actually allow for a bunch of creative stuff, and it's garden paths. As you may know, you get gardens in between buildings, and something new that was added is once you have enough of these kind of arches, these connecting pieces in the middle of gardens, you can get some garden paths, and it's pretty neat. And sometimes you can even get a little fountain like this at a certain junction. So, you know, it's not too special, but just like everything in this game, because it, you know, uses this very procedural generation, it still allows for a lot of variety in what you do with your buildings. I'm not even entirely sure what else you can do with these paths, but it's cool to see how, for instance, if I do this and then do this, it's just cool to see it change and see what happens to all of the paths here. Anyway, let's get into the video and start the time lapse and start building some Venice. Alright, now I've seen my fair share of YouTube videos of Townscaper at this point, and it seems like a general trend is for people to start off with the foundations of their city, just laying out what it's going to look like and what the shape is going to be before they actually start adding buildings. And I'm gonna do the same here, mostly because I want to shape the Grand Canal first, which is the main canal that goes through the middle of the city. And this canal has a very distinct S shape if you look from above. And because this is Townscaper and this recreation is of course not going to be super accurate, I wanted to make sure that I got the shape of the Grand Canal kind of realistically down so that at least it would look somewhat like Venice looking from above. And I also wanted the sides of the canal to be as smooth as possible and to sort of follow the curves of the naturally generated grid. So that just took a bit of trial and error to find that space, but I think with the layout that I got going now, it's decent, and I can still also feature the island here in the south. And besides that, the only real realism, I suppose, of trying to make this look like Venice is that I'm trying to also imitate the urban fabric that Venice has. I'm not really going to recreate any of the spaces in the city because that would be insanely difficult and really pretty much impossible with Townscaper, at least as it is right now. The only exception to that, I guess, would be St. Mark's Square, which I'm trying to figure out how to do right now. The big red tower you see is the bell tower of the Basilica, which of course also doesn't look super accurate, but I think it gets the idea across. Like this is clearly the square which it is supposed to be. And then here's the Doge's Palace, and the Basilica itself, I couldn't really figure out how to fit that into the picture anymore, so at this point I'm not actually adding that. Also, in real life the tower should actually be detached from the building, but because this is Townscaper and the space is very limited, I figured it would look slightly better with the tower just attached to the building like that. And something you'll also see is that all of the buildings around this square have lots of arches, so I'm just using the in-game archways to try and recreate that a little bit. But I think where it gets really interesting is in making the urban fabric of the city itself. This is not actually my first time trying to make Venice in Townscaper, but the first time I just wasn't really happy with it because I took a very similar approach to building the buildings that I already had done before, and it looked very similar to my first video of the game, and it just didn't really look like the urban fabric that you see in Venice. I have to add, I've never actually been there, but I have Google Earthed it a lot, if that's a word, so I just didn't really get the same kind of vibes. Venice is very dense and has lots of buildings in very tight spaces with not a lot of street between it, and definitely not a lot of open spaces between the buildings either. And my first attempt just created very small houses with lots of streets and lots of space between it, and it just didn't really resemble the urban fabric of Venice from above. So on this attempt, I am trying to fill the map with as much building as I can realistically get away with, while also trying to fit a few canals and small streets in between. So a lot of this is actually down to trying and figure out what kind of tricks I can pull on the game to put lots of building pieces together while maintaining the red roofs and trying to prevent those flat roofs from forming. And I think a major part of the trick is just that if you have lots of building pieces together and you don't have any odd shapes sticking out, and whenever many buildings are connecting in certain places, you have some height variation so that different roofs can form. As long as you kind of work out the rules of how buildings form in this way, you can actually connect many buildings together and fill up a huge percentage of the map with just buildings instead of streets or water. So most of the time you'll see me place 2x1 grid buildings together, which form these nice rows of buildings where you can see the gable is on the side of the building, and then the entire row just ends up working like a row house. Very similar to what buildings look like in the game if you only make them 1 square wide, except these are all 2 square wide. But even when you build buildings like this, you can still add a row of building behind the whole thing and it'll still have a regular roof. Or you can connect buildings in all directions, and as long as you get the shapes right, they'll all still have normal roofs. So as you can see, it's shaping up to be super dense and you get these lots of little streets. I think the only downside to building like this, where you just connect many building pieces, is the fact that everything seems to be a lot smaller. The scale of the game seems to be a lot smaller, because whereas if you just build buildings that are single grid spaces large, you can very quickly create something that looks like a huge city with lots of townhouses. But this scale, while I think it's a bit more realistic and results in a slightly better looking urban fabric, you can tell that the map is quite small, because with the entire layout that I've created here, I am almost using all of the map, and it just looks twice as small than or as the one that I built on the first episode, just because the buildings are much bigger. But in the end, I'm pretty happy with it, and I think it works out this way, so I'm definitely gonna keep it like this. I'm also not going to have too much variation in the colors of the buildings. I know that of course in Townscaper you can add all these different varieties of colors, but realistically most of Venice consists of very beige, white, light-ish colors for the walls, and then all the red roofs. So the roof part is down pretty much perfectly. But yeah, that aside, I'm keeping it pretty simple and not really adding too much variety there. And something I should also note while I'm at it, and also my apologies to all the Italians out there, but I am building a few more buildings that exist in real life, or at least Townscaper variants that are inspired by it. So the building that I just built on the lower right on this island is the Basilica of Santa Maria della Salute, whatever that is. I've never actually been there, but it looks really cool. Looks like a beautiful building, and I definitely butchered it in Townscaper. But it looks like it is one of those signature buildings of the city, and especially as it sits close to the water there, that at least I wanted something that kind of resembled it, to add a bit of variety to the city and not just all make it houses. But that aside, yeah, it's pretty much just houses. One thing that I did figure out actually works out a lot better than trying to plan canals beforehand is to just build streets, and after you've built all the streets, try and figure out if there are any streets that you want to or can turn into canals, as opposed to placing canals down first. Also, I'm working on a giant church here, which is inspired by a real-life church as well. It's I forgot the name actually. Gosh, what's it called again? Oh yeah, it's the Basilica dei Frari, something like that, which is a really big church in Venice. But yeah, on my first try of making Venice, I first laid out where I wanted all of the canals to go, but that turned out to be quite a challenge because trying to figure out where the buildings would go along that and trying to see how the street pattern would look turned out to be kind of difficult. And in hindsight, if you want to build a city with canals in Townscaper, I honestly think it's a lot easier to just build it without canals, just build streets at first and then see which streets you can turn into canals, because you'll always have these perfectly spaced out urban fabrics with places that can be turned into canals. The only downside is, of course, that you won't have any canals with roads next to it, but you can always clear out some buildings if you want to have a strip with roads as well. I just found it interesting that sometimes it was easier to add a canal in hindsight as opposed to planning it out at first and trying to figure out, how the buildings could fit around it. Obviously, I did plan a few canals here, but it is a decent way to try and do them in hindsight, honestly. And at the end here, I'm just trying to fill out the remaining space of the map that I still have left, but that is pretty much it. Not much else to do here, and it's basically finished. So let's take a look at how it turned out. So here's the final result, and if I turn on the grid, you can see that I almost used the entire grid. It still looks a little bit small compared to many Townscaper videos that I've seen, but yeah. It's really the bigger buildings. Speaking of which, I do kind of want to explain them again because I am very aware that I explained them terribly the first time around without an example to show. So let me just look at these buildings. Something that I did for most of the map was to build buildings that are 2 grid spaces deep and 1 grid space wide. So this row, for instance, is 3 buildings like that, each a different color, so that you can get a different colored roof and they all look like individual buildings. Very neat. And then you can still add a ring of lower building around that as well, and you'll just have very nice roof. So with these kinds of tricks, you can fill most of the map in with building spaces and with roof space, which I think for Venice, being as dense a city as it is, was really essential to getting the look right. And that's about as much as you can do. This church isn't really realistic, but it was a small attempt at trying to create some flying buttresses, or at least kind of emulate the look of them. And I'm not entirely sure why I put this like this on the front. There must be... Oh yeah, there you go. That's there just to make sure that the whole thing is roof. So yeah, even though you might not be able to tell right away, there are many buildings on this map which have some strange shapes or roof pieces sticking out just to make sure that everything is a red tiled roof. And then of course there's the plaza itself, which in real life should actually be closed off as well, but I think in the game it works pretty alright like this. It also showcases how cool this thing is that you get when some buildings are very close to each other and their floors are tall enough. You get these, well, I guess they're clothes actually. I'm not sure if they're clothes or just drapes or flags for celebrations, but it looks pretty cool anyway. And of course there's a tower itself as well, which is trying to emulate the real look. I'm not sure how much it looks like Venice from the side, but at least from above it does seem to give very Venetian vibes, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then there's also this canal, which I think this was one that I created afterwards. This used to be a street and then I turned it into a canal. And honestly, I think this is the one that works out the best of the variety of canals that I have in the city, especially with this kind of door connecting to the other side and this, well, this sort of gate that the canal is going through. I think that's pretty cool. There's also one here which is very straight and straightforward. There's one here which kind of cuts through the middle of the city and comes back in here, and well, there's here one too, and there's one here as well. So there are quite a few canals actually, a bit more I feel like than you would expect at first glance, but there's still not too much. It's very difficult to fit in as many canals as you would have in real life Venice. Anyway, I feel like I at least want to showcase my quote-unquote failed attempt at Venice, so just for a second I'm gonna look at that monstrosity and explain why I didn't like it as much. Yeah, I already can't stand to look at this mess, but a small analysis of what went wrong here, I think, is mostly just the fact that all of these houses are tiny and they're all connected in ways that aren't particularly like the urban fabric of Venice. And what's up with this actually? Why is all of this stone? That doesn't... Okay, well, I mean, this is always a challenge, isn't it? I guess that works. But yeah, it just doesn't work as well. I also think the colors are a bit too off, and altogether, this is the kind of thing that you can make in Townscaper, and it still looks super cool because the art style of the game is really nice, but it doesn't really have the same feeling of the harmonious urban fabric as Venice. So it just doesn't work out as much, and it just turns more into a blur of tiny houses. Still looks pretty cool, but that's mostly courtesy of the game, and I'm not too proud of myself for this one. So, what did we learn today? I don't know, but I had fun building this, so that was pretty cool. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next Townscaper video, when that ever happens. Take care.